Hello and welcome to Episode 7 of Super Respectable. My name is David Lewis. I'm back in the Netherlands, and with me, as always, is Toshio Rahman in Istanbul. Tosh, how's it going?
Hey Dave, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm happy to be back home despite the weather here. It's just always nice to be back in your surroundings, especially in COVID times,
That's right. You just came
to have
back
all the creature comforts.
for sure, and you just you had reported live from location twice, and now you're back.
Twice.
Now you're back home uh in Amsterdam. Are you missing your time in Venice? Are you wishing that you were there, or did you have enough? Was it a good amount of vacation time for you?
I think it was a very good amount of holiday time. We extended by a week, so we had 3 weeks in total.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes you can't have too much of a good thing, and you have to, come home to know how good the holiday is, and yada yada yada. So I got to say, it was very much worthwhile doing the trip to see Rome without so many tourists, to see Venice with lots of tourists, but not hundreds of thousands of tourists.
Yeah.
Um, but like we were chatting about just before the start of the podcast, the coronavirus cases, the second wave seems to be starting.
Yeah.
So I feel good being back home and, can sort things out here if things get really bad and just take it easy.
You might have just gotten that trip in the nick of time, right? It might have just been restricted to travel soon, depending on how it's going.
Yeah, from what I've heard, there's a press conference tonight in the Netherlands where they will likely announce that we can't leave The Hague
Wow.
without a good reason. So lockdown in the city.
Wow. It's
Yeah.
crazy this whole week around the world. I think a lot of countries are kind of going into a second or third wave. It's not great back home in Canada either. I don't know if you've seen or not, but Ontario, BC, our home provinces are hard hit, and
Hmm.
it's a scary situation. And you and I, it's not like we were the ones who predicted this, but we discussed that winter is coming or fall is coming. Probably it would be not a great situation globally because of weather change, because of fever season,
Mm.
flu season, and so like it's just kind of following suit. I think.
Yeah, I guess people enjoyed their summers and they've all come home and had possibly some holiday somewhere. They've all come home and possibly that's where all the spread is happening. People
Mm,
are back in school. I don't know people who are back in their offices, but I assume it's more the young ones that are to
yeah.
blame.
What's yeah, young people.
It's kids these
What
days.
kids these days never listening. What's happening with like school in the Netherlands and in Canada? Do you know if it's like is it open? Is it function? You have nieces and nephews back home. What's the
Yeah, um, I know a little bit about what's going on in the Netherlands. Some friends with children here, they're back in school. Um, I think there's been some sporadic cases in some schools, but they don't seem to shut down the entire school. They'll just
Mm,
isolate the student or teacher in question.
yeah.
Whereas in Canada, I think if there's a case identified, the entire class or school has to get tested, and it causes a lot of issues. But no, the nieces and nephews, they're back in school too.
Yeah.
I think they're happy to be back, but it's always nerve wracking for the parents to have their kids back in school when there's a pandemic on.
Well, kids like you don't have kids, I don't have kids, and like but from our friends who have kids, I always hear, and I knew this growing up too, that kids usually get sick a lot because of the environments they're in. They pass it on to their parents, and so in these situations, I would be on edge if I was a parent, right? I don't know if I'd send my kids back to school, to be honest. That's
Well, I think part of it was the parents wanted their kids out of their hair for a bit because it was quite tense for a few months and very
and deal with
difficult
it anymore.
yeah, to get their work done. So I think there was mental health considerations more than physical health at this point.
Yeah.
So
Of the parents, not
uh,
of the kids.
both, but
it's
mostly the parents.
it's a tough call too, and you gotta, and if we fast forward, let's say 6 months or even 12 months from now, potentially there's some kids and even junior school kids and high school kids and maybe university kids who could potentially be missing out on anywhere between 6 to 18 months of education, not getting proper education that they would have gotten.
Yeah, it'll be interesting down the line when they look back on this period to study like the outcomes of these children, whether there was any developmental issues that resulted or who knows what. But let's hope not.
Maybe like in the future in 10, 20, 30 years when they look back on this, they'll be like the generation that kind of like lived through COVID, and they'll be seen as like a write-off. It'll just be like, yeah, no worries. Oh, you were that generation? Yeah, it's okay. We'll get you
It's
through.
fine.
It's fine. Don't worry about
Or
it.
they'll have more creative ways of educating children, and they'll realize they didn't need to be in school for 7, 8 hours a day.
Well, I was just talking to my wife about that a couple of days ago. Was that the whole world is kind of turned upside down, and people are working from home, and some businesses are working remotely, and it seems to function for the most part, for some places. So I wonder if a lot of new places will just adapt this new way of doing things, because at the end, it's probably like saving them dollars and cents too. Like not having people come into a physical office space and paying for people's coffees and like this and that.
For sure.
So I'm not sure.
Yeah, so many changes.
That's right.
Well, it's my turn to present this week. Would you like me to get going, or?
Please, I'm excited. I'm looking forward. I have zero idea whatsoever. So I'm all ears.
Yeah, so I think this could be an interesting one.
Okay.
2 weeks ago, I presented a report on site from Venice, and I talked about Plague Island in Venice. So I thought about, upon returning to the Netherlands, I haven't talked about the Netherlands yet that much, and I think I'll tell a story about something that happened here a few years ago.
Okay.
It's not gruesome. We've had a pretty gruesome trend the last few episodes, so I thought I'd lighten it up a little bit, but there's still crime involved, so that should keep our listeners happy and Tosh happy.
Yeah.
So this one is a theft. It's an art heist.
Oh, I love
that
it.
took place in 2012 in Rotterdam. So that's about just under an hour's train ride away from me here in The Hague. The Netherlands is very well known internationally for its artists, the painters, Van Gogh, and all the painters here that made loads of money during the Dutch Golden Age.
Mm-hmm.
But most people tend to go to Amsterdam for that sort of thing. But Rotterdam has some very good art galleries in its own right. And this one was quite a massive art heist. It involved the theft of 7 masterpieces. Wow. There was Monet's, Picasso's, Matisse, Gauguin stolen. And these were stolen in just over 2 minutes.
What?
In October 2012. It happened so fast.
Wow.
And when the detectives showed up on site, about half an hour after it happened, and then the day afterwards they did their review, they just assumed it was the work of some real expert art criminals.
Wow.
But they were wrong. It was done by a few morons. Well, I guess I was being a bit harsh in calling them morons, but they were not experienced in the field of stealing art, as we will discover through the story. So they were, it's a gang of Romanian criminals that were living in Rotterdam.
Okay.
And they were from a pretty poor part of eastern Romania. And they moved to the Netherlands to make more money and make a better life for themselves. But they were, as it was understood, criminals in Romania too. And so they just moved for a higher level of crime in Rotterdam. And so they moved there, and they brought with them their girlfriends. And nice guys that they were, they pimped their girlfriends out, and they became prostitutes in Rotterdam, while the men went and did break-ins in houses and stole watches and jewelry. So they were experienced in break-ins, so that's where it helped in the case of this art heist. But that's basically where their experience stopped.
Yeah.
So they were doing this crime of petty theft and prostitution, and then a couple of them got restless and wanted to aim higher. And he had this brainwave and just thought, I want to, go for some big stuff. I want to get steal some art and some masterpieces. So I guess he became slightly cultured living in the Netherlands, and they decided to steal some of the artwork on display in Rotterdam.
Wow.
So they all agreed, and they scouted out some possible galleries and museums, which would be the best bet to steal some stuff. At first, they stopped at the Museum of Natural History, which is a mistake because all they had there was stuffed animals, which you couldn't really sell for much, as I don't think. And it's kind of hard to steal certain animals because they're pretty awkward to hide and carry.
Yeah.
So thankfully for them, Rotterdam's galleries and museums are all clustered together, so they could quickly walk around and figure out which was the best bet.
Yeah.
And then they stumbled upon the Kunsthal, which just means art hall.
Yeah.
In Dutch. And they noticed that there was an upcoming exhibition of about 250 masterpieces that were being put out on loan from a very wealthy Dutch shipping family.
Yeah.
I'll get to their name later. I think they're called the Cordias.
Wow.
So they're very rich, had about 400 billion dollars net worth, and they had built up this incredible art collection, and they made a point of loaning it out. They took great pleasure in loaning out their works. And so this was the first time they had put out their entire collection in one place. So yeah, their collection had these masterpieces, like I said, of Monet's, Picasso's, Matisse, Gauguin, what have you.
Yeah.
And so they settled upon this one because they recognized the name. I think most people know those artists worldwide, and they figured, well, we don't know much about art, but we know those names, so they got to be worth something.
Yeah.
So then they decided to do some reconnaissance work. They did some due diligence. They hung out, got tickets to the Kunsthal, pretended to be interested in the art, but they really scoped out the security features, where would be a good place to break into.
Yeah.
They went jogging around the building. They went for walks at night to see whether there were security guards walking around, just to basically take notes and to figure out like the best approach.
Yeah, of course.
And then while they were doing their scoping inside the gallery, they of course looked at the art itself, and they tried to figure, okay, it has to be of the right size that we can quickly take it off the wall, stuff it in a backpack, and go. We don't want to be stuck holding like gigantic masterpieces and then being caught out in a park somewhere with it. So that was their criteria, and they made a hit list of ones that were easy to grab and run off with.
So it was mostly, at this point, it's by size, right? The ones that they're choosing, the ones that could be not folded, I guess, but like carried out very quickly. And put
it was basically their criteria, is what I read, was it could fit into a large backpack.
Okay, got it.
So I don't know if you've ever seen the Mona Lisa in the flesh. It's actually quite tiny. So it was of that size, and that's what they were going for.
Cool.
So they had initially planned on doing the robbery at night during the week, but it was actually quite nice weather, very clear, and so it was hard to pull off the robbery. Then it became Thursday and Friday. Saturday, not great nights to steal stuff because it's busy, people are out partying. And so they decided to wait until the night of October 15th, when it was overcast and a bit cloudy. It was a Monday night, I think it was, so not very busy. And then, they break into a emergency exit of this Kunsthal.
Yeah. And
it was apparently very easy to break into. They used just some sort of pliers to crack open the door.
Okay.
Um, so that set off an alarm.
Yeah.
And they knew there'd be an alarm that would go off, but they also knew that they could be quick because they'd quickly
Oh,
identified what was small and within that room that they were going to go to. And
yeah.
they just quickly grabbed everything and stuffed it in their backpack and left in, I think it was about 2 minutes, 30 seconds. So very, very quick. So on that front, they were doing very well.
Yeah.
So like I said, they targeted paintings that were on the ground floor. They didn't have to go up and down stairs, nothing cumbersome. They also, unbeknownst to them, or I'm not sure if they're aware of this, but none were connected to an alarm system. So the paintings, once you lifted them, wouldn't set off another alarm. So the only
Oh,
alarm they had going was
from the
this
emergency
one
exit. Yeah.
from the emergency exit.
Yeah.
Another thing in their favor, which they identified, was that there were no night guards. There was no guys walking around. It was
Really?
just the alarm would trigger for a local security company to come and check it out to see what was going on.
So it was
So that
empty at
gave
night.
empty.
Oh.
But they figured that there was enough CCTV
Yeah.
cameras and tripwires and what have you that the security company that they hired would be on site as promised within 20 minutes, half an hour.
Yeah.
And they were there, but it was too late.
Yeah.
So they managed to get away, but the problem started pretty much right away after that.
Yeah.
They had a getaway driver that was in the area,
Yeah.
but it was some walking distance away. And when they had their phones to call to get the driver to pull up, for some reason, the phone network was cutting out.
Okay.
And so for half an hour, they were having to walk around awkwardly
Yeah.
in the neighborhood and try and not attract attention, even though it was 3, 4 in the morning.
With
And
these
they had
backpacks.
backpacks on, and there was an alarm blaring.
Yeah.
Um, so eventually, they made contact with their getaway driver,
Yeah.
and they decided that they should not go home
Yeah.
with the art. They knew they had done something quite significant, so they decided to drive to Belgium across the border. So from
Okay.
Rotterdam to Belgium, it's not that far.
Yeah.
And they just went straight. They went straight to Brussels,
Yeah.
and they somehow made contact with a criminal called George the Thief.
Oh, that's a cool name.
And he was apparently well known in the
Art
criminal
world.
underworld. And they went to see if he knew anyone who would want to buy this art off of them.
Oh. Okay.
And he said, not right off the bat, but I'll think about it. Give me a couple days and I'll get back to you.
Yeah.
So they were stuck there and they said, still have the art. So we'll go back to the Netherlands. It's still the day after the theft.
Yeah.
And they returned to Rotterdam. And then they checked the news and they realized the scale of what they had done. It was all over the TVs. The reporters were all around the Kunsthal. It became worldwide, international news because of the big names, and everyone likes to hear about a art theft of this kind of this nature. So then they started freaking out. Then they realized they're going to be combing all over the Netherlands for them.
Totally.
They're not safe there. It's a small country that they'll probably be caught and found out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So the same day, they bundled everything they owned into their car,
Yeah.
the art and everything, told their girlfriends, come along, we're leaving the Netherlands, we're done here.
Yeah.
They told their friends that they had cyclists.
Yeah.
They basically said apparently said they killed someone, they had to go, which is not really the best of excuses.
Of course.
And they drove.
Yeah.
They drove all the way from Rotterdam to Romania, apparently without stopping or barely stopping until they got to Romania because they were so freaked out.
Is this a long drive?
It's a huge drive. It's apparently 2 full days of driving.
Wow.
Almost nonstop. And they only stopped for rest on the second day at a hotel on the border with Hungary and Romania when they were kind of convinced that they were safe and that they were probably going to crash their car because of sleep deprivation.
I'm looking. I just googled it. 2,000 kilometers is the distance between the two.
Yeah, it's a big drive.
Yeah. Wow.
So, yeah, then they were back at home in Romania,
Yeah.
and they were left with a dilemma because obviously they stole these things to make a bunch of money and
Yeah.
to live a good life because they figured, well, this stuff's worth millions.
Yeah.
Um, and then they saw the news reports, and it kind of got blown out of proportion because the media got excited. And they said it was
Yeah.
hundreds of millions, 200 million, 300 million. It was millions, but not quite that much. It was
Okay.
probably closer to like 10, 15 million dollars.
Sure.
Um, so, but then they were in Romania, where there's a lot less of a market for
Art.
masterpieces worth millions of
Yeah.
dollars. So they tried to find people in Romania who would buy it, and at this point, the thieves were gonna they marked down the price a lot. They said, okay, well, we'll sell it for a couple 100,000. At least that way,
Yeah.
it's good for us. It's not good for the art,
Yeah.
but it's good for us. We've made
It's
a huge amount of money.
it's off our hands kind of thing. Yeah.
Um, but then they started getting really exposed as amateurs. He started walking around to meet up with people with the art in little shopping bags. Um, these are hugely valuable works, and he was not really taking good care of them.
Yeah.
And then when he was trying to describe to acquaintances what art he had purchased,
Yeah.
had stolen,
Yeah.
he tried to write down the names to explain. But then
Yeah.
he couldn't spell them. He didn't understand what he had stolen, and so
Oh.
the people who he was trying to go to sell them thought this guy doesn't know what he's doing. He's not doesn't really have anything serious because he can't even spell Monet properly.
Yeah. Unprofessional.
Um, totally unprofessional. But then, as luck would have it for the Dutch and Romanian authorities,
Yeah.
who were looking for things. Sorry, it was not the Romanian authorities; it was just the Dutch.
Yeah.
One of the people that they were going to sell something to, so they went for a meeting somewhere at someone's house.
Yeah.
And this was someone fairly serious. They found someone who was, I guess, a multimillionaire Romanian.
Yeah.
But this multimillionaire was no fool.
Yeah.
He brought along an art expert from the
Yeah.
Romanian National Art Gallery, who was an
Oh.
expert in these artists
Yeah.
to verify whether they were forgeries or whatnot, which is a
Yeah.
very real thing, right? They don't
Yeah.
want
Yeah.
to be
Totally.
screwed over by buying something that was fake. And so at first, this lady's like, what have I got myself into? For one reason, she said, well, I'm being invited into this kind of poor apartment, really run down area
Yeah.
to look at these things. Like this guy's getting scammed. But then she took a look at it, looked at the back that had all the right markings, and she
Yeah.
became shocked. She said, "This is unbelievable.
Yeah.
These are like all genuine, masterpieces."
Yeah.
And she asked the thieves, "Can I take this into like a dark room or something where I can do a bit more analysis?" And she said, "Sure enough, these are real."
Wow.
So this was where things got the Romanian authorities involved because she contacted the Romanian police and said,
Sure.
I've just encountered these stolen pieces.
She must have known about
And
it as well, right? Because of what's happening in the. Yeah.
absolutely, good point. She went online after this and then started reading some articles about it, and she became petrified because the stories were saying Albanian gangs had taken it, very bad people had stolen this stuff,
Uh,
and so she didn't want to get mixed up in all this stuff. But
yeah.
she, said, please protect me, but I want to report this because I care about the art so much,
Yeah.
and these people don't know what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the Romanian art, well, I don't know if they have an art police, but they have a unit dedicated to high value items that have
Yeah.
been stolen.
Antiquities and arts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
jewelry and
Jewelry.
what have you.
Yeah.
And so at this point, this is taking the Dutch are involved, the Romanian authorities are involved, and it's starting to get really tense for them. But they think they find someone who's going to buy it off of them for about
Yeah.
100,000 euros each
Yeah.
piece, so about 700,000 sale, which is still very good for these guys. Um, excuse me. Where are we? Yes, and they get a bit suspicious because the guy gets very excited and he's really pushy. He said, "I really want to buy this." Blah blah blah
Yeah.
blah. And they were right to be a bit concerned because the guy was acting as a front for the Romanian police.
Oh,
Um,
the cover.
and they had, and the Romanian police were pretty funny. They had trained up one of their officers. They got like a crash course in like
Art.
art, so that they
Great.
could at least appear to be somewhat knowledgeable. Because
Yeah.
they one of their cops was going to show up at the sting
Yeah.
with this millionaire
Yeah.
and then say you're under arrest. But he had to
Yeah.
first like pretend like he knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
Anyways, that was all for nothing. But the men were arrested very shortly after that. The cops eventually found them, and they were arrested in Romania.
Yeah.
But the problem was they were arrested, but then the police said, "Where's the paintings?"
Yeah.
And they didn't say anything. And that became the big mystery. Where'd the paintings go? These are all, it shouldn't be hard for them to find.
Yeah.
It turned out what had happened was um, these guys kind of got wind that they were time was running out for them, and so they left all the art at one of their crooks' aunt's house.
Yeah.
And the aunt then spoke to the mother of one of the criminals, and the mother was freaking out because she was reading the news and knew that their boys were up to no good, and they'd done something terrible. And so she said, "Let's go bury the stuff in our backyard." And then she said, "Oh no, that's terrible. Like they're going to come to my house and they're going to turn everything upside down." She dug it up again, and then she dug it in a graveyard nearby, in a village. And then she said, "No, that's really stupid. Like these things are all really bad ideas. I can't have my son be caught with the art." So she took the art out. She unearthed it again. And apparently, what happened? She confessed to having done this. She took all the artworks and she shoved it in her stove and set fire to them and burned them off.
No, really?
Yeah.
She burned all 7 pieces of art?
So she burned all these like absolute masterpieces that are worth millions. They're effectively priceless, really.
Well, really, now they have no value.
now they're literally priceless.
Oh, no way.
And so she confessed that she wanted to do it to protect her son because she didn't want to get caught with the art. But then they said that's kind of a stupid thing to do because that was a negotiating tactic that they could have had. You could have had leverage and said, "Look, I'll give you back the art if you reduce my sentence." All sorts of things, but with no art to
there's nothing,
give
no
up,
leverage.
There's no leverage at all. So these guys, I'm not quite sure on their final sentencing. The lawyer's trying to push for them to get sentenced in the Netherlands where it was stolen, but they were apprehended in Romania. So I think they faced a pretty harsh punishment in Romania and are still in jail to this day. And to conclude the story, it's quite interesting. The only people who made money out of this theft, do you have any ideas?
The original owners?
Yeah.
Insurance, right?
Yeah, insurance. They made a ton of money off of this.
Oh.
They had actually insured the art that they had put out on loan at double the value, double the assessed value.
Holy wow!
So they apparently made about 18 million euros. They got an 18 million euro payout from the insurance company for this. So it's much more than they ever could have received at auction at the time for any of the artwork. And apparently what was happening, the Cordia family, the father who had earned all the money had passed away a couple of years prior to this. And so the children were gradually selling off the art anyways. And obviously it's quite upsetting that this very valuable art in their collection had been stolen and
Yeah.
destroyed. But they made out quite well on this theft. So
Wow.
that's the end of this art theft. I recommend anybody who's planning to do some kind of
Thievery.
theft like this to do a bit more diligence on what you do once you've stolen the items.
Yeah. I it,
Becomes quite a bit of a hot potato.
That's true. I'm wondering, you know how you just ended it off with the fact that the original owners got a huge payout. I wonder if they were involved. If this was a movie, I'm sure it would have been like they hired the seven guys indirectly to do it because they knew they were like not that clever, you know, and they'd get caught and they get paid out for it. But I don't
I
know.
had the exact same thought when I read that because I'm like, well, that's almost too good to be true to find these hapless criminals
Yeah,
and the art gets destroyed.
yeah,
And because you hear all these kind of insurance scams and, a restaurant burns down, they get an insurance payout and start another thing.
yeah.
So I don't want to accuse them of anything, but it's a very nice payout that they've received. Um,
Wow, that's amazing. I'm
yeah.
surprised that like well, a couple of points. I'm surprised there was no security in a museum that had such countless pieces of art on loan. That I'm sure things have changed now because of 2012, right? Now I'm sure the museums all in the Netherlands have upgraded their
It's
security.
always after the fact that they've changed everything.
Because if you I don't know
Um,
if you've gone to other museums. So whenever I go into a museum, I always look at the art and I always imagine how could I steal this. Of course, it's just a game I play in my brain. I would never do it. Let's be clear. But if you look at especially if you look at some museums and pieces of art, there are little security features on the bottoms of the museums, of the paintings, sorry, or the art. You can see it. So, like you were saying in your story, that like even if you would trip an emergency exit alarm, you would also trip one if you took a piece of art, right? And so
yeah,
I think a lot of the bigger museums now around the world have them. Even here in Turkey, sometimes when I go to museums, they have a lot of old antiquities, and you can see little security features on them. Whether it's visible or not, you can tell there are like stamps or stickers or wires and connections. So no one can just grab them and run off, right?
yeah, and I've noticed because I've been to a bunch of galleries here in the Netherlands. There is still varying degrees of security, whereas some places they really want to preserve um, like the authenticity of the experience for the visitor to be able to go near the art and what have you.
Yeah,
And they'll still see some people pointing at the art, and they get really close to like actually touching it and
touching it.
sticking their finger on it. And the best they can do is have someone watching, going,
Yeah, yeah,
Madame, please don't do that again.
yeah.
Whereas at some other galleries, I've seen someone's arm, if it goes like any kind of motion towards it, it sets
Catch it.
off a little
Yeah,
alarm.
yeah,
Obviously, not like a big fire alarm blaring thing, but a little subtle thing, which
yeah,
frightens them.
yeah.
So I'm surprised that it's probably a relatively inexpensive investment for um, you know you don't want to get involved in the embarrassment and shame of having accepted someone billionaire's art and losing it.
Yeah. Why do you think so many rich people have art like that's expensive? Do you think it's for their own collection, or do you think it's for like secondary means? You and I have had this discussion in the past, where we talked about how a lot of rich people use art to like as tax shelters or to hide their funds and stuff in things. But I always seem to find that billionaires have like unimaginable amounts of art that they always just loan out to make it seem like they're philanthropies, to make it seem like they're very much into philanthropy. But I think there's this hidden motive behind art collection.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. I mean, a lot of them just want to diversify. They have so much money they don't know what to do with.
Yeah,
Sorry, they so they'll buy a football team, they'll
yeah,
buy art, they'll buy sports cars. They just want to have diverse assets. So like,
yeah,
the last decade, almost everything's gone up in price, like in a crazy way. Wine has gone up so much, stocks. So for people like you and me, the best we can do is, maybe buy the house you live in, invest in the stock market and buy some Tesla shares. But when you have like billions of dollars, that's not enough. These people just want to keep going and going. And then there's the other angle of they're possibly wanting to store their wealth in a different way.
yeah,
And I think we talked about it once, where there are these tax-free zones
Yeah,
in places like Singapore and Freeport in like Geneva,
yeah,
where these people don't even want to display the art. They don't want to show it off at all.
yeah,
It's purely just, you know, held in a warehouse somewhere
yeah,
and not seeing the light of day,
yeah.
but just for the fact that they've owned it. And these people are probably more just trading it and possibly laundering their money in a way that is not very
In the in
nice. But
when we brought it up, it was because I had seen an episode of Billions where the main protagonist or antagonist, depending on how you see him, who is a billionaire, he did that same thing. Is that he had art in a tax-free zone, but he had a duplicate piece of art which he had made, and he had it up on his wall. So his thing was up on the wall, but his actual one was back in a tax-free zone. So,
wow,
and then he
that's
got,
that's a very creative way of doing things.
yeah, it is. But I mean,
I've actually heard some other cases where some unscrupulous art dealers were taking advantage of the billionaires.
oh, really?
So they were um, taking advantage of the fact that these people had tons of money. They didn't necessarily
Know about art.
appreciate or understand the art so much, and they were massively inflating the price of the art. Because I mean, that's the other thing is how do you value something like this?
Yeah,
Because like in this case, at first the media were saying the stuff's worth hundreds of millions, and ends up being 18 million.
that's a good
But if
question.
you're an art dealer, you could go to a Russian oligarch and say, "Hey, I've got this Van Gogh that's worth 100 million,
Yeah,
but it's going up in value. Next week it'll be worth 105 million. You got to buy it now."
yeah,
When it's really like an intangible thing. It's whatever someone wants to pay for it at
well,
any given time.
I think that that's more so of an issue at the beginning, right? When no one, like when the art first starts. But for example, like if you looked at a piece of art or an artist who's really famous now, you could somewhat justify it now because it's been worth this for the last X amount of years. So now it's inflated in price, or it's a Monet or a Gauguin, right? So like, but if like a new guy came out, you would kind of like that would be a difficult part too, right? And I think that I'm not really well versed in the art world per se, but it is very fascinating. I know right now the whole craze is with Banksy, and this anonymous
Yeah,
artist who does like politically motivated art, and no one knows who he is and stuff. So like even his pieces are going for millions too. Like I guess which is probably counterproductive. He didn't really want
and
that, but
and the poor guy. I mean, he started off as the street artist, still
yeah,
he still is.
yeah,
But people are going so crazy about his art that they
yeah,
are performing their own kind of art theft. They're
yeah.
kind of chiseling out the walls
Yeah, I saw that.
where the art is. And I lived in the UK for a bit, as you know, and he's from Bristol
Yeah,
allegedly, and so I went to go see a bunch of his original stuff.
yeah,
But for some reason, those things have been preserved. But all his new stuff doesn't last.
yeah.
It'll like get ripped out of a wall and then will magically reappear at auction somewhere in Miami, which I find absolutely fascinating.
It's crazy. Yeah. I think this whole art thing is like it seems like it's one of those things that you just do for show. I mean, I'm sure there are really great artists and people who are really appreciating the work and the process, but for buyers, it just seems like more of a status symbol, right? It kind of seems like one of those things like you were saying, that you might not know the actual artist or the history or anything about art, but because your culture or your society is doing it, the group of people you're in, you have to kind of follow suit too, right? Like I hear about like people spending like $50 million on a piece of art or $200 million, and it's like that's insanity for a piece of thing like that, like just in your house with no purpose other than just a visual aesthetic, you know?
Yeah, and especially like there are these controversies over, sometimes you go to an art gallery and you think, I could do that. It
Yeah,
looks like
yeah,
it was drawn by a 5-year-old, right?
yeah,
Is that really art?
yeah,
And there's a controversy in Canada because Ottawa's the National Gallery in Ottawa.
yeah.
I
I know
think
what you're gonna say. Yeah,
I think it was in the 80s or when they were first like building up the collection
yeah,
for the new building.
yeah,
They purchased this art from this artist Mark Rothko,
yeah,
and he's known just for doing like 3 lines or 2 lines of one color,
yeah. I
and
don't
it
know.
cost like $50 million, and it was a huge controversy.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, those are the kind of things that people who are not as cultured and refined get upset about. But
well, Mark Rothko, he won in that deal. So like, good for he
Yeah,
probably. It's probably one of those things where he couldn't get his essay done the night before, so he just kind of pulled an all nighter, and he was like, "I wonder what I could do." Three
I
easy
actually heard
lines. Yeah,
um, there's a documentary which I haven't seen yet. It's from maybe a decade ago now
yeah,
of uh, a 4-year-old who actually did art,
yeah,
and her parents went off and started trying to market it and sell it in
yeah,
New York,
yeah.
and but they never disclosed, as far as I'm aware, that it
Who
was
did?
done by their 4-year-old daughter.
Yeah,
And so they managed to like create a reputation for this artist, and
yeah,
people ended up paying like six
what?
figures or something for it.
Yeah,
Then eventually they like revealed that it was their daughter, and
yeah,
people got upset and said, "Hey, that's not fair."
yeah,
So they said, "Sorry, you could have asked, and we would have told you, but
yeah.
you went along with it, and we're just trying to prove that it's uh, it's just art is what it in the is beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? If
Yeah,
you think it's beautiful and you want to pay that much, then
that's
go
it.
for it."
It's definitely a world I have no knowledge on. I mean, I enjoy good art, of course, and like but it's one of those things as a business. It's completely flabbergasted me. But I have a question about. So were they caught when they stole the art? Were they on CCTV? Like, was there video recording of them doing it, or did they avoid that?
Yeah, that's an element I neglected to mention. So another aspect that they were quite good and lucky on was the particular area that they stole from
Yeah.
didn't have CCTV coverage or very good CCTV coverage. There was, I think, a camera in the
Uh,
room, but for some reason it wasn't aimed at
uh,
the paintings they stole. And so when eventually um, well, when the theft became known, the
yeah.
Dutch authorities and police went through like hours and hours and hours of footage to try and determine who the thieves were, because they figured, well, they must have gone into the gallery beforehand to
Yeah.
see what they were doing and figure out what to do. And
Yeah.
eventually, they identified them. I think they walked in with sweatpants on and were not really that well dressed, and
Amateurs. Yeah.
they didn't look like the typical gallery visitor.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Well, the fact there was seven of them is also sort of weird. Seven dudes, right? Like together, because it's kind of not it's a very peculiar thing, right? Like a little strange that seven guys. Like for example, I was just while you were telling me the story, I was thinking about like where did they go wrong? Was it the actual stealing of the paintings or the actual selling? And I mean, they seem to have gotten the paintings out. It just seems to be during the actual selling of the paintings that they got caught. But they could have made the original process a little smoother, right? Like in case instead of having seven guys go in, you could have had one or two and maybe gone for higher value paintings as opposed to kind of lower ones or I'm just trying to think. Have you seen the movie The Thomas Crown Affair
a long time ago.
Pierce
Yeah.
Brosnan? Yeah. So he steals a painting out of it, and like I'll just tell. I won't spoil it. It's been like 25 years. I'll spoil. I mean, I will tell you because it's been 25 years or whatever. So he's really clever in how he steals it. In that, so he's a billionaire, and he just for kicks, he likes to steal paintings and art and stuff. So he actually steals it by because he keeps going. And well, first of all, he doesn't dress in sweatpants. He
Okay, that
dresses in
helps.
suits, and he's been going. He keeps going to the gallery for weeks before he steals the painting because he admires to kind of give off this image that he admires the painting. He makes friends with the guards and everything, and his guards are like, "Oh, Mr. Crown, you're back again." It's like, "Yeah, I'm just here to view the painting over and over." But what he's actually doing is he's doing recon, right, of the place, and he's always holding a briefcase, and the briefcase is important because the day he does steal the painting, he pulls the fire alarm, and he also notices where the cameras are and aren't. And so when he takes
Ah, smart.
yeah. So when he takes the painting, what he does, actually, it's really clever. What he does is he takes the painting and he puts it into a custom-made briefcase. So the painting doesn't fold, but you're able to minimize the size of the painting, right? So he's not carrying it out on a backpack. He's carrying it out in the briefcase that he walked in
Mm.
with. And then so he's able to pull the fire alarm. Everyone's leaving, so he gets the painting. He puts it in. He goes, and then the twist is that at the end of the day, after the painting is stolen, he like the benefactors in your story donates a replacement piece of art, which is very high valued to the museum in the short term. And then in the end, you find out that it's the original painting he had just painted on top of it, right? So when the fire alarm hits again at the end of the movie,
Wow.
it just kind of like erases it and then it shows it. So he just does it for like a thrill ride, right? Not really for actual selling or whatnot. But art heists are really fascinating to me. I wonder how many have actually been successful versus how many failures there are. Because these guys weren't really like didn't really think it through, but there are guys who really do think it through, like really to every
Yeah.
detail.
So in one of the articles, there's I think it's a New York Times article about this case. They, I don't know how they found him. They found a Dutch art thief. He's in
Oh
his
wow,
70s, and I guess he served his time or whatever, and it was just available for interviews. And
get him on a
so
splitter or something.
he said he explained his technique and the kind of perfect scenario for stealing art.
Tell
And he
me.
said basically you should never steal from a gallery, a museum, or anything like really institutional because they have got backing, they're state funded, they're
Yeah,
have state of the art security in theory. um, and then number two, you should have um, pretty good connections yourself. You should
yeah,
possibly be somewhat well-to-do yourself, and have like a plan to how you're going to sell the art, which these guys clearly didn't. And number three, he said, go for high value stuff, but not
yeah.
stuff that's so like masterpiece that you're gonna like
Can't sell it.
be in trouble and you can't
Yeah,
sell it, because it'll be so well known that it'll be impossible to hang on the person who buys it in the
yeah,
wall because they'll say, well, that's stolen, you got
yeah.
to give it back.
It's too
um,
hot, right? As
it's
they
too
say
hot.
in
So
the
basically, he said, go for things that are valued at like around 100,000 and below, and
yeah.
then just steal a bunch of those, and you'll do very well.
Wow. Well, why is it that you should be well off? Is it to avoid suspicion as a suspect, so people don't like if you're like that's a good point. If you look at a lot of heist movies, by the way, most people are actually pretty rich. Like they are high value people, right? Like in the Ocean's movies, the people that he steals from is pretty high up, and then like in the Thomas Gun, I wonder if it's so like they avoid suspicion, like Batman, right? Like Batman, no one would be like, oh,
Yeah.
Batman. Even though if I was living in Gotham, I'd be like, hey, who else has the money to drive around in this like customized car and this Batmobile and this like helicopter and stuff in this big mansion? It'd be Bruce Wayne. But I wonder if that's why.
Absolutely.
Maybe they're just bored. Maybe that's just like it's their thrills in life.
I'm sure that's a big part of it. They've got so much money, and it's a hobby for them, and they want to mess around with their friends for a bit by stealing their
Yeah.
artwork. I don't
But
know.
but you're so right in that like they needed to think it out for sure. I mean, you get the goods and the merchandise as the lingo goes, the merch. But then like you probably have to go straight to the black market, but you need like reliable sources because everybody like you don't know who to trust, especially in this situation. So like we buy all this stuff and they probably rushed it. They didn't have patience. If they waited it out a little bit, maybe they could have actually been able to sell it. Just a theory.
That's also very good. That was one of the thief's points. He said you have to be patient and bide your time. Wait for kind of like the media hype around it to die down a little bit,
Yeah,
and then start working it and marketing it around. These guys were in a huge rush. It was like hot potato for them.
yeah,
Um, yeah, but I was thinking, like, I read a couple articles, and I used to work at a bank doing like anti-money laundering and like anti-financial crime stuff. Um, and there's a lot of reasons why most of the crime and thefts that happen now are just online,
yeah,
because it's so easy for these people, if you're good with computers,
yeah,
and you're quite charming,
yeah,
that you could make a lot of money just by stealing from corporations or rich people.
yeah,
And it's all digital. It's
yeah,
just transactions happening online. And you don't have to like a physical thing that you're stuck with that you can be caught with necessarily.
yeah.
So it seems like if you're the smartest of the smart criminals, you're doing all your thieving where we can't see you. And that's
Yeah.
with the
That's
zeros and ones online.
this is the new age of thievery, I guess. The
It
online thing.
is.
And yeah, I mean, like I don't know. I like a well planned out heist, whether online or in person, is somewhat respectable. Maybe super respectable. But
It's super respectable. But I have to say, like, I think this has the makings of a good movie.
yeah, totally.
Um,
Like a comedy,
because
right?
it's kind of a comedy. Yeah. again, it's just
Yeah.
like really hapless criminals, and kind of has a funny and sad
Not with
ending.
like our friend George Clooney or Brad Pitt or those guys who are very suave and elegant. You need like Will Ferrell. You need like
Yeah,
Jack
Sacha
Black,
Baron Cohen.
Sacha Baron Cohen, like
Yeah,
the comedic group of it. That's so funny. So these guys are in jail. Do you know if in Romania or in the Netherlands at the moment? Like, what's their update? It's been.
I believe they were tried and arrested in the Netherlands. So
Mhm.
their lawyers tried to get them charged in the Netherlands, where
Yeah.
they assumed that they would have a better chance, and they kept on bluffing and saying we had the paintings and
Uh,
we're gonna like you say use them as leverage to try and have a lower sentence, because if you can hand it back, it's much better.
yeah, but no.
But sadly, they were all incinerated.
Was the aunt, do you know, held or charged with anything for actually incinerating the paintings?
So I didn't get to the bottom of that one. Apparently, she confessed.
Yeah.
The mother and the aunt confessed to being involved, but then they also retracted their statement. So
Ah,
they're being really sketchy about it when they
yeah,
realized, I think, how stupid what they did was
yeah,
and how it had served no purpose whatsoever.
yeah.
Um, so I'm not sure whether they face something. I would hope so, because that's for me that's like criminal negligence as well, to
Yeah, at least
destroy the art.
destruction of property, aiding and abetting,
just
at least.
just do the
Yeah,
right thing. Like my mom, if I ever got into such naughty things, she would say you have to give it back,
yeah,
or and she would, go with your tail between your legs and give it back.
yeah. I wonder when the criminals found out that their aunt had burned the painting, what emotion and feeling went through their mind. They're like, oh, it's hard. It hurts. I get it. I know it hurts. And you're like, yeah, no more leverage. And even like just the idea of that type of, even the art dealer, I'm sure people in the art world, everyone has heard a little bit because they are really well-known artists who did it. And yeah, I mean, I would too. But I would imagine that if it had gone successfully, it probably would have been sold on the black market just to a private buyer, right? Or buyers for their personal collections.
Yeah, that's where I have a hard time figuring out, like, the successful art thieves, how they end up selling their art and what happens to the art. I would imagine it doesn't get hung up on someone's wall. It's probably in one of these free ports
Oh,
in Geneva
yeah.
or Singapore. But then again, like I would imagine that they would still have pretty rigorous controls in Switzerland over like the authenticity. But then again, you can create pretty good like certificates of
Yeah, totally. And,
uh,
and if
whatever.
you if the person who stole the art was some successful multi-millionaire billionaire, maybe there's no need to sell it. It's just I stole it and I'll put it in my vault or something. Nobody will ever know, right?
Yeah, put it in your country home somewhere or your beach house, and
Yeah, that's cool. I don't know if you've had any experience with art in your house, but we have like most of the art in our house is stuff that we painted that my mom put up when we were like 3 years old. But you know, those like school paintings. But my dad actually won a painting at my sister's like preschool raffle, and it was like the second prize. It was worth like 4 grand. It's up in our house.
wow.
It's really like that's the nicest thing we have in our house at the moment. And so
And is
like
it located near the exit or entry point to your house?
it's no, it's in some place that you cannot even get to without a ladder, and it's huge. Like I would say it's at least 4 feet,
Uh,
3 feet or something. It's really big.
and,
But
and it's in your coronavirus room where you put all the hazardous materials.
no, this is back in Vancouver, so like no,
Okay.
no there. But do you guys have art or anything displayed in the house? You
Actually,
collect
yeah, we
art.
do. Federica, my girlfriend, is very good at drawing,
Hmm?
and she has recently finished 3 pieces of art, which I'm staring at right now,
Okay.
and which I will show to you, but unfortunately, our listeners won't be able to enjoy.
Oh, wow.
Um, but other than that, we tend to just take postcards or nice posters that we find
Yeah.
on our travels, and we put a nice frame around it. So I can't say that they're worth that much, but visually it looks pretty cool.
Yeah, I have the same thing. My wife is a great painter, so she's painted me two paintings for one for my birthday and one for our anniversary, and which is really no great.
That's
And so
nice.
they're really nice. And but what we do is so whenever we travel around the world, we get two things. And the first is we always get a fridge magnet of the place we travel to. So I have a bunch of them on my fridge. it's just like and then the second thing is that we try to get some piece from wherever we've traveled into the house, whether it be like a little antiquity or a little like a piece of art or something. And my favorite one is in Hong Kong. We were going. So you've been to Hong Kong? You know the Peak? You know that thing that goes up, like the the gondola on the side
Yeah,
of. So when we got to the top, there was a guy who was doing like Chinese
yeah.
calligraphy with your name and stuff. And so we gave him our names, and so he wrote it in I guess Mandarin or Cantonese in a really cool way. And then so we bought that. So that's my favorite piece. And so like it's got both our names on it, and it's stamped, and it's cool. It's framed and stuff. So yeah,
Wow.
I think it's cool. The next one I think we'll get is probably the like a Monet or a Van Gogh or something.
Yeah, go big or go home. Really, that's good.
Go
That's the
big.
best thing to do.
If I had a Van Gogh or Monet, I would freak out. I don't know what I would do with. Can you imagine going to someone's house? First of all, you'd have to know what it is. So most people would be like, "Oh, that's a nice painting." You'd be like, "Yeah, it's nice." But if you knew
Well, the
what it
thing
was,
is, like
yeah,
in my parents' house, they used to have a Monet hanging up, and
yeah,
it was a duplicate, replica, whatever.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, growing up, I didn't quite understand it, and I thought, well, that looks nice. But then I'm like, why would you buy the real thing? I mean, that looks just as nice, and I
Totally.
still get the same level of enjoyment from it. So
No
it's like in
insurance.
Florence. I
Yeah,
don't know if you've been to Florence, but the thing to see in Florence is David.
yeah,
Michelangelo's David,
yeah.
and I've been to Florence once, and sadly, I've only seen the replica because there's two
Uh,
Davids in Florence. There's one outside the museum.
yeah,
I'm going to probably make a huge mistake. I think it's the Uffizi Gallery where it's held.
yeah,
Someone can correct me later. And the real one is obviously in there.
yeah,
And when I went there on a school trip, I said, "Oh, the lineup's too long. I can't be bothered. I could see the second the replica there, and it looks
yeah,
fine."
yeah.
Then my friends who went in, they came out and said, "Nah, David, you have no idea. The real thing is so much better. The level of detail, the this and that." And I can't tell whether they were pulling my leg, and I never went in to see. But
You never saw it. Yeah. I mean, I'm one of those people that like I like art galleries and museums, but I only look at things that interest me. If it really doesn't interest me, which I can tell within like a quarter of a second, I'll move on, and I have no regrets or whatnot. But I like. Are you more? Do you think more into antiquities or into paintings? Do you have a preference?
that's hard. I mean, I can tell you right off the bat what I don't like,
Yeah,
and it's there's some galleries which are really into like religious art, and it's almost all just pictures of Jesus,
yeah,
and it's like all they did at a certain period
yeah,
in Europe. So you can go to some galleries and you look around, and it's all a variation on a painting of Jesus
yeah,
doing something, or the disciples, or some sort of allegory from the Bible.
yeah,
Um, so that's not really my thing. I do love the classics.
yeah,
Those are nice, and I believe they're classics for a reason.
yeah.
Um, but then the modern art stuff, that's hit and miss, because
I agree.
sometimes I'm like, they're just like messing with us, and this is not art at all.
Yeah,
And I think the real thing is the story they tell. Like there's a caption next to it which explains it, and you're like, okay,
yeah,
I now I understand. But if you just presented it on its own and you
yeah,
put that next to like a Picasso or a Monet or something, I'd go, well, clearly someone's just left their stuffed bear behind, and
yeah,
that's not art.
yeah. It's like a stuffed bear with like a hole in its head and
Or the hole in its head or
holding
something.
a gun. It's like some type of representation of society. I totally agree with you. I think the postmodern stuff is definitely a hit or miss. I've seen stuff which I loved and I thought it was like amazing, and I've seen stuff and I just really was like, this is not it. I saw the art exhibit, art slash. A couple years ago they had that exhibit where they took human bodies and they flipped them inside out,
Oh
and
yeah.
I saw that and I thought, this is not art. This is just disgusting and is gross. And so like yeah, I think it all depends. But I will admit, on the other hand, I should be fair, is that when you see like a really good painting and it really captivates you, whatever the theme of it may be, it can be like, I can understand you being emotional. I can understand having like all these moods, and even just being attached to this thing. Because I've looked at paintings, I'm like, wow, this is really beautiful. And so I like scenery. I like paint. I like, if you can get a nice
Yeah,
scenery, it's really
those
really
are great.
beautiful. Yeah, yeah. So
I mean, those kind of classic cheesy ones of a beach view or
yeah,
countryside. I'm like, oh, that's cool. I like that, and I can
yeah,
recognize the skill involved. And I'm
yeah.
like, I could never ever pull that off, and I'd appreciate the skill involved in that kind of artwork. But I was just thinking while you were talking of a story where my family did a trip to New York 20 years ago. The one time I've been there, um, and we went to the Guggenheim
Hmm.
Museum. Have you been there?
I have
It's this
not. I
kind of
went.
Art Deco thing. It's
Yeah, yeah,
all
yeah. I haven't been there though, but I know of it. I've been to some of the other museums in New York, but not the Guggenheim.
yeah. So this one is like more modern art
Yeah,
and some weird conceptual stuff.
yeah,
And on the inside, it's one big spiral. So there's no, from what I remember, no individual rooms. You just
yeah.
kind of walk your way up to the top, and it's winding in a big spiral. And there was one area I was walking with my dad, and I'm sure he'll be okay with me telling this story, and he'll dispute that this ever happened. But there was one area where it was just lights. So
Yeah,
it was just like office lights on the walls, on the ceiling, on the floor.
yeah.
And I was walking with my dad, and he kind of looked at it, and he thought this was very bizarre, and maybe there's a mistake somewhere. But he saw the switch, and he just flicked the switch,
Yeah,
and he turned it off.
yeah.
And within seconds, the like security guards were on us, and we're like, "Sir, what are you doing? You can't do that. That was the art exhibit." And he said, "Well, don't put the light switch there. What are you doing?"
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I would like I would go to like I go to museums with my wife, and I think she and my sisters. I think they do it, but I don't think my parents, especially my dad, is really like that type of guy. You know what I mean? Like I don't think he'd really get it. But maybe he's got his own type of art that he enjoys. But yeah, it's just one of those things that like when you go to a city or you visit somewhere, and if it says that like you got to visit this museum or whatnot, or if you've got an extra couple hours, you might go. But it's not like something, or if they have a very famous piece of art, perhaps like the David you mentioned or the Mona Lisa. But it's not like an active thing. But that does remind me, before I leave Turkey, I have to go to the Museum of Modern Art. It's free
For sure.
on Thursday nights for because I'm not paying 70 lira to go, and I'll be you can quote me on that because my final question to you was, do you think museums should be free or there should be an admission costs? And if the latter,
Oh,
should it be insane? Because some museums are crazy expensive, which is I don't think great. But some museums, like if you ever go down to Washington D.C., the Smithsonian, all those museums and galleries are all free. So
really? I didn't know that.
I think there might be a couple that you have to pay, but the majority of them are free. You can just walk right in. It's for the public good. So, what do you think?
Um, I, that's a tough one because I lived in London for a time,
Yeah,
and under Tony Blair's administration, one of his things was making the museums and galleries free,
yeah,
all the state-owned ones, and I think that's fantastic.
yeah,
I don't necessarily think it should be free. Possibly a token amount, like $1 or
sure.
$2, just so people have like something they feel like they contributed.
I agree.
It's like a tip. Like I would go, once a year, possibly if I was in London to any one of these things. I would leave
Yeah,
a couple bucks because the other problem that creates is that obviously with the pandemic, tourism's declined,
yeah,
but it becomes like insufferable the amount of people that are inside,
yeah,
and so it becomes very uncomfortable. And everyone has this thing when they're at galleries is they're all taking selfies, they're running through, they got to take a picture of the Mona Lisa, they don't really appreciate it.
yeah, yeah,
So I think opening it up to the masses is obviously very democratic and a good thing,
yeah,
because in Ottawa it's actually, I think it's offensively expensive. I think it was like
yeah.
20 something bucks, $30. And if
Crazy
you go
amount.
with your family, I think it's a nice thing to do with your family. If you got kids,
Yeah,
take them to an art gallery. It's a
yeah.
beautiful space, but you can't do that if it's like almost $100, right?
$100. You could do so much. I agree. When I lived in Ottawa, I would go to the National Art Gallery. There's certain sections which are free all the time, and then on certain
Okay.
days, I think they were cheaper. But I agree with you. On a normal day, it's insanely expensive. So you would always try to find the cheap days or the deals or when you could do this and that. And especially for like young people and families and people who you want to know about, art and history, and you have these resources, you should try to make it accessible for them. But I agree, giving a token of a donation or suggested donation, for example, might be a better approach than some crazy amount of money, because it's how can you force people to pay that much? And I know some people can do it, but it's really just it's a process of learning, and you don't want to deter people from that.
Yeah. So in conclusion, yes, I think they should open it up to the people, especially if it's a state-run thing, right?
Yeah, for sure. Because the
They
government's
shouldn't
sponsored.
like seal it off to the people who can afford it.
Yeah.
Um, so
What's
yeah, before you leave Istanbul, it's a kind of funny thing. Like before I leave, I've moved around a lot,
yeah,
and like in the weeks that wind down before you go, you
yeah,
start thinking about all the things that you
yeah.
haven't done yet in a city.
I know.
So I assume you'll probably have the same feeling. You'll like do a mad rush through the city and
Just get it done.
go to all the restaurants and galleries, Corona permitting,
Yeah.
that you can.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dave, so much, and thanks for presenting that. And to our listeners, if you're planning a heist at any point, let us know. Maybe we can report live.
Let us, let us know. See if we can take it off your hands.
All right, Dave. Have a great night.
Yeah, you too, Tosh. Take care.
Bye.